And welcome to Law and Crime Now, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We're going to start with the conclusion of an intense armed standoff out in Texas. A man took his family members hostage. The police negotiations lasted overnight. 3 officers were shot, but thankfully they're in stable condition. And the hostages were eventually released. The suspect was taken into custody after he surrendered himself. Absolutely incredible. And I want to start right now with Mike Harmon, who's the interim chief of police. He held a presser on all this.
After 16 hours of negotiating with the young man inside of the house, about 15 minutes ago, he did release his brother and his sister and the family pet, a small dog. I have been in contact with them. They are doing well. They are being interviewed by our negotiators and treated by EMS to make sure that they're in good health. This is positive news after 16 hours of negotiations. Our negotiations team has been doing an outstanding job throughout the night and ever since this incident really started. What I do want to say is we're reaching out to this young man to let him know that we want to end this in a peaceful resolution.
Over 16 hours of negotiations. Absolutely amazing. I'm joined now by law and crime legal analyst Terry Austin and trial attorney Kelly Hyman. It's great to have you both here. Kelly, I want to start with you. I got to tell you, it's pretty remarkable that in today's day and age, when there's such an anti-police climate and we're questioning police officers' behavior, especially when much of that behavior is criminal, what we see here is a story of the good guys of law enforcement. I mean, over 16 hours of negotiation, there have no deaths, no life-threatening injuries. The hostages are okay. There's a situation where 3 of their officers were shot, and yet they showed restraint, patience. They didn't rush in, and this seemed to have a peaceful conclusion. I'm just amazed at this, and it seems that this is actually a light in such a dark time. What do you make of it?
No, I agree with you, Jesse, 100%. And first and foremost, my thoughts and prayers go out to the officers and the families. Officers put their life on the line every single day to protect us. And this is such a great story to show that there are good police out there, and they negotiated for 16 hours and made sure the people inside the house were safe. So thank you for all that you do, officers, every day. We appreciate you.
I think that's really well said. Terry, I want to turn to you. We don't know a lot of details about this. We don't even know the names of the officers who were shot, the suspect, the family. So law enforcement right now is keeping everything pretty close. And I'm curious, if we think about what's happening right now and what charges this suspect could face, I mean, what is the back and forth right now? I'm assuming they're interviewing him if he doesn't, lawyer up. And I'm assuming they're interviewing the different hostages and speaking with them. What is the process right now to ultimately figure out what is he going to face?
Well, first, I would like to also say job well done. I mean, and in this time when we see escalation, the fact that they were able to de-escalate the situation is really kudos to that police force. Yeah. I think in terms of charges, Jesse, obviously this was the individual's family, but we could see kidnapping charges. We could also see under Texas Penal Code, there are charges that could be brought in terms of restraint, at least against what was happening with the family. As far as the police officers are concerned, obviously he could be charged with, as far as shooting a police officer, attempted murder or assault charges. So there are a wide range of charges that could be brought against this individual.
Kelly, it might be too early to talk about this, but we believe that officers had been called to this residence before, that this suspect might have suffered from mental health issues, and they might have taken that into account in how the officers conducted their strategy of dealing with him and negotiating with him. But when you think about mental health here, and yet this is a suspect who spoke to police over this long period of time, negotiating with them and ultimately surrendered himself, how do you think that's going to factor into a legal case?
If there's mental health is questioned, then it's always going to be an issue because whether the person had, the intent of what they did or allegedly what they did. So I think it's going to play a key factor in the determination of what charges he's charged with and what crimes. But once again, the officers, 16 hours. I mean, this is such a wonderful story that really shows that the police did not, go in there. The family is safe and protected. And once again, the officers are in stable condition, and hopefully, everything will be okay with them as well.
I was following this case over the weekend, and this could have ended up a lot differently, and we could have had an entirely different report. I want to switch gears and focus on a different update, an update for you in the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell part of the world. Well, Alan Dershowitz, this is Jeffrey Epstein's former attorney. As you might know, he is suing alleged Epstein victim Virginia Giuffre for defamation after she sued him for defamation. Remember, she claims that Dershowitz sexually abused her. Now, he has adamantly denied these allegations, called her a liar. Well, right now, he is trying to get the former CEO of Victoria's Secret, Leslie Wexner, to testify that he too was a victim of Virginia Giuffre's alleged extortion scheme. So this is pretty major, and we kind of heard an inkling of this when Alan Dershowitz appeared on our very own Law and Crime Now. Take a look.
Look, you can make up anything. She told the FBI who she had sex with. She never mentioned me. She had a book. She never mentioned me. Then she meets her lawyers. Her lawyers pressure her, according to her best friend, to mention me for money, and then she accuses me. Now, it's easy to accuse somebody. She has no evidence. She has no proof. I said from day one, I hope there are photographs. I hope there are videotapes. I hope there is all kind of evidence. That's why I want all the evidence to come out, because I know the evidence will prove that I never met her. Her own lawyer, Bradley Edwards, said she lied by accusing prominent people and Leslie Wexner. She says that she had sex with Leslie Wexner on numerous occasions. Brad Edwards said, no, Leslie Wexner is telling the truth when he says he never had sex with her. If her own lawyers don't believe her, why should the media believe her? Why should anybody believe her?
Okay, so let me start with you, Terry. Dershowitz seems to want this corroborating evidence. He's actually asking the court to compel the deposition testimony of Leslie Wexner, but Leslie Wexner doesn't want to provide anything. So how do you think this is ultimately going to play out?
I do think that the testimony will come in because I do think it's relevant, and I think it's more probative than it is anything else. It's certainly not prejudicial. One thing I will say about Alan Dershowitz, though, is that he is very adamant. He's defended himself. His story has remained the same. So I think the public is going to want to know, what does Leslie Wexner have to say? Was he, in fact, extorted to say the things that he has said in the past? And will his testimony at the end of the day help Alan Dershowitz in his case? We have cases back and forth for defamation, and maybe it will help Dershowitz at the end of the day.
Ironically, these cases of defamation, everybody's still trying to get to the truth. That's the same situation we always see in these cases. But, Kelly, I have to ask you, this is a little strange. Do you find it strange that Wexner doesn't want to be a part of this? And why does he not want to be a part of this? And just to take a step back, the reason Dershowitz wants him to testify is that apparently in a prior communication with their lawyers, there was a reference to Giuffre shaking down these high-profile individuals. And Dershowitz seizes on that line and says, well, why would you mention shakedown? You mentioned shakedown because this is the same thing that's happening to your client, Leslie Wexner. So the idea that Leslie Wexner does not want to be a part of this and is opting out, and I'll read you the language right here from the attorneys. It says, we believe Mr. Wexner has no non-privileged information relevant to a claim or defense on Mr. Dershowitz's allegation of an extortion scheme. Basically saying he can't provide anything that's relevant. What do you make of that, Kelly?
I think that's very interesting, but ultimately it'll be up to the judge to make a determination on whether it's relevant or not. And if the judge determines that, it's relevant, discovery is very broad. And if the judge says, yes, it's relevant, then he will have to testify. Now, there might be some kind of scope, and that means there'll be certain subject matters or limited questions in regards to what questions are asked. And maybe this deposition will not be released to the public and we might not find out the information. But ultimately, it'll be up to the judge whether the judge feels that the information is relevant. So it'll be really interesting to see whether or not he testifies or not.
Terry, let me ask you this. The fact that Dershowitz is so aggressive here and, is compelling people to speak on his behalf, that he's suing her for defamation. After the time we interviewed him here on Long Crime Now, people came back to me and said they think that he's innocent, that he wouldn't be this aggressive and strong in his words if he really did do this or if he really did have something to hide. Do you think that his strategy is making him more credible?
Absolutely, Jesse. There's no question about it. I was here that day that he came on the show, and I listened to his words, and he was adamant, and it's a great public relations strategy to make sure everyone knows that his story hasn't changed. He knows he's innocent. He wants everyone to testify on his behalf. He has nothing to hide. In fact, I just saw a recent interview with him where he says, I have nothing to hide. Please come forward. So I do think that it is an excellent strategy. And I will be shocked, actually, if something to the contrary comes out, some hard evidence to the contrary. Because right now, remember, it's just he said versus she said.
Well, I tell you, I know somebody who's watching this carefully, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell. She is going to be sitting in jail for the next year, waiting to see what ultimately happens. And you have to imagine that this back and forth between Virginia Giuffre and Alan Dershowitz is something she's very concerned about. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we want to focus on a really horrifying case, Cannon Hinnon. We'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. I want to focus on a story that you might have seen, and it is horrible. Cannon Hinnon. He is the 5-year-old out of North Carolina who police say was shot dead while playing outside. 25-year-old Darius Sessoms has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Now, here's the eerie part. Cannon's father, Austin, had dinner with Sessoms the night before the killing, and they're apparently neighbors. So we don't know what is going on. Now, Cannon's father, Austin, did sit down with a local media affiliate to just explain, is there any rationale, any reason why this would have happened? Take a look.
Can you explain why he would shoot your 5-year-old boy?
I have no idea why he would kill my son in front of his 2 sisters, his cousins. No idea.
Just the night before, Hinnant says he had Sessoms over for supper. They sat on the porch, drank a beer together.
So, because there was never anything between me and him, any bad blood whatsoever, for him to have a reason to do this.
Kelly, I'm in the same boat. I don't understand. From the facts that we've seen so far, this makes absolutely no sense. So what is your reaction to this case? Because I don't think I've ever seen or heard anything quite like it before.
Well, it's understandable that the family is really upset and is calling for the death penalty. There's no reason that this individual would have shot a 5-year-old in front of the rest of the family. He clearly has, I think, some mental issues going on or some anger. There has to be some motive behind it because, to take the life of an innocent child, there has to be, at least in my mind, some explanation for it, because otherwise I think we can't really come to grips with how something like this could have happened.
Yeah, and we know that there's a GoFundMe page, Justice for Cannon, that's reached, I think the last time I checked, was $750,000. I mean, this is incredible. And so when you mentioned the death penalty, Kelly, what is the reality here in North Carolina that this man, if ultimately tried and ultimately convicted, that he could face the death penalty?
That is definitely possible. I mean, this is such a horrific thing. I mean, a 5-year-old innocent boy and his sisters had to watch him being killed. I mean, words cannot express how sad and upsetting this whole situation is. But definitely, if the jury comes back and finds him, guilty of the crime and the death penalty is on the table, that's definitely a possibility.
So what do you think here? I mean, you mentioned that what Kelly just said, Terry, is that the sisters, 7 and 8, watch this. And I have to imagine a trial would happen. I mean, not going to happen tomorrow. Might happen a few years down the road, a little older. Are we going to actually consider them to be eyewitnesses to this? We've seen things like this before, but to imagine these young girls explaining what they saw, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and hopefully they are getting some information now, because I think over the course of the years, and I think it will take time to try this case, because oftentimes it takes years, and certainly with COVID-19 it's going to take some time. But I hope they take statements now, and I hope that they keep the information fresh so that this case can be tried and have all of the evidence against this individual. You know, even if they push for the death penalty in North Carolina, it's lethal injection, and they haven't actually executed anyone since 1998. So the chances of this individual actually being executed, I think, are going to be slim based on what we know so far. But I do think they should pursue it, because this is about as heinous as it can get.
What is Sessoms going to do here? I mean, if you're legal counsel for him, what are the next steps? And Kelly, that's to you. I'm sorry.
No, no problem. I mean, I definitely think that if there's some kind of mental health issue, definitely to get him evaluated and see what's going on. Because, you know, I'm wrapping my finger around why would anyone shoot an innocent 5-year-old boy? And I'm not coming up with anything. I mean, unless it comes out that there was something happened at the dinner and there's some other kind of motive or something going on. But I think, you know, that's going to be very difficult. But I would want to make sure that he received mental health evaluation right away, just as have him assessed.
Well, we talked about the family's feelings towards this. Again, this is Kennan's family members, including his mother, talking about what they're hoping for here.
This man took my girls when he took my baby. They know that he's in a better place.
While 25-year-old Darius Sessoms is in jail facing charges for killing Cannon, family and friends say there's still justice they want to see.
I want death penalty, and I'm going to seek it.
I agree with Cannon's mother that we are going to seek the death penalty.
Okay, and now, Terry, here's the weird part about this case. I mean, there's so many weird parts about it, but another eerie part. The police actually had to issue a statement and say, listen, there's false information online out there. There are these false posts seemingly looking like law enforcement to the public, confusing the public, almost trying to say that race is a motive here. And again, we don't have a motive for what happened. But these kinds of false posts being put out there that have no basis in reality, no basis in fact, what do you make of that?
You know, I saw that as well, Jesse, and it's a little bit frightening to think that people can post whatever they want, and you don't know if it's real or if it's the authorities. And at the end of the day, you know, we have to watch this. And fortunately, the authorities did come out and say those weren't our post, and that wasn't accurate information. So they've directed people to come to the police if they want more information about this crime. So it's easy with social media to put up information that's not accurate. And sadly, I don't know the motive behind it, but sadly, people do try to incite some other issues out in the press.
Kelly, is this tougher for law enforcement to investigate? Is it tougher for the DA's office to prosecute? I mean, where does this kind of heinous attack of a 5-year-old rank in terms of other investigations and prosecutions?
Yeah, you know, all investigations where someone innocently dies is horrific. But just the fact that an innocent 5-year-old boy was playing with his 2 sisters and was just shot. I mean, there's no reason for that. So I definitely think that they're going to do everything that they can, you know, to get justice for this little boy. And ultimately, the court will make a determination on what the penalty is for the person that shot him.
Terry, what about the family, though? They have to go through interviews for all of this, right? I mean, Austin, the father, is a central figure here. He knew the defendant, had dinner with him. That conversation is going to be dissected. This is going to be, I imagine, more difficult for the family in more ways than one.
Absolutely. You know, whenever there's a death in the family, and certainly if it's a child, it is very difficult for any parent to think that their child's death preceded their own death. And obviously, when it's a 5-year-old, that's even more difficult to imagine. And they will have to do interviews. And Jesse, they may even at a certain point be people of interest, because the authorities really have to make sure that they dot all their I's and cross all their T's. And I think they will be interviewing the parents and any other relatives to see if there might have been some animosity between the shooter and the family. So it's going to be difficult. It's a long process. Then, of course, obviously, there's going to be the trial process, and that's going to be even more difficult, where they're going to have to be witnesses at the trial. So it's a very hard process for anyone to go to, particularly when it's your own child.
And Kelly, let's just confirm it here. Sessoms is in jail, denied bond. There's no way that he can get out pre-trial, right?
No, I really don't see any way that that can happen. I mean, they can try and get him out. I mean, you know, with COVID and everything going on, you know, things have changed where they're letting people out because of it. But I don't see that happening. I really don't.
Well, it's a case that we'll continue to follow, because we all want answers to something that really you can't explain. So it is a case we will continue to follow here on Long Crime Now. When we come back, we have to focus on the Golden State Killer, because his upcoming sentencing should be something to should be something to watch. And we are going to broadcast it on Law and Crime. It is remarkable that after all these years, the man who had terrorized California in the 70s and 80s is going to have is going to be not only in court, but meeting face to face with not only his victims, but the victims' family members. And that is something that many people never thought was going to happen. We'll be back right after this.
Mr. D'Angelo, regarding count 23 and the charge of offense of kidnapping with intent to commit robbery of Jane Doe 10, having occurred on November 7th, 1978 in the county of Contra Costa, a violation of Penal Code Section 209. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Well, if you want to call him the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, the Visala Ransacker, that man you just saw right there, Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., will be sentenced to multiple life terms in prison after pleading guilty to 13 murders, 13 kidnapping-related charges, and he admitted to hundreds of rapes and burglaries, 161 uncharged crimes. That was the last count. So that is incredible. And what we know is that this hearing is going to last several days, and dozens of his victims and victims' family members will have the opportunity to provide statements in court. We expect them to be incredibly powerful. And what we know is that it's going to be split into two different sections. So the first half of these hearings is going to be about the victim impact statements regarding the sexual assault. And then the next batch of victim impact statements will be about the murders. So Terry, Kelly, I just broke down what we can sort of expect. But Terry, I'll start with you. What else can we expect? What are you looking out for during this sentencing hearing?
Well, Jesse, this is an opportunity for the victims' families to have their day in court. This defendant, we know, has brutalized so many people and killed so many people. 7 different counties, actually, were involved here. And to your point, you know, he had multiple charges. I think he's serving 11 life sentences. It probably should have been more. Obviously, 1 life sentence is all you really need. But I am expecting that the impact statements are going to give the families an opportunity to release, to talk about what losses they have. And I really hope the camera is showing the defendant and showing the fact that it's impacting him. I want him to feel the pain that these families are going through. So that's what I'm looking for, the release from the victims' families, and also the fact that the Golden State Killer will, in fact, feel the impact of these statements.
Terry, I hate to disappoint you, but you might be not getting that. You know, Kelly, when you look at this guy, he's been accused of faking this kind of incoherent rambling, this kind of confusion that he has, that he doesn't know what's going on, and that he's pure evil. So I have to ask you, do you expect a statement from DeAngelo during any portion of this hearing?
I don't. I don't expect anything. You know, I think that this is an example of a bad cop. I mean, this is horrific what happened to these women and their families. You hear some of the stories of one young girl who was 15 years old, and this changed her life. She used to do cartwheels out in front. She became very isolated. She had 3 marriages that didn't work out. And now through therapy, and this is going to give her an opportunity to tell her side of the story. So I'm hoping from the victim's standpoint and their family that they get some kind of peace from it, no matter how the defendant acts, or in fact, if he gives a statement. But I don't suspect that he's going to say anything.
Just to give everybody a sense of what we're talking about here, listen to one of the prosecutors during an earlier hearing when DeAngelo ultimately pled guilty. Just listen to what this is about.
1976. On the evening of September the 4th, 1976, Jane Doe number 1 went to her parents' residence located on Crestview Drive in the city of Carmichael, County of Sacramento. The victim went to her parents' residence to do some laundry. At approximately 11:15 p.m., she loaded the clean clothes into her car that was parked in the street in front of the residence. After placing the laundry inside the car, she turned around and was suddenly confronted by Joseph DeAngelo, who told her, "Don't scream." DeAngelo immediately punched her in the face and broke her nose. After the victim fell to the ground, the defendant dragged her to the side yard of the residence, which was not within view of the street. At this point, DeAngelo forced her face down onto the ground and tied her hands behind her back with some shoelaces that he brought with him. At knife point, DeAngelo led her into the residence while threatening to slit her throat. He said, "All I want is your car so I can get to Bakersfield." Joseph DeAngelo unlawfully kidnapped and carried the victim away with the intent to commit robbery within the meaning of Penal Code Section 209 and used a knife to do so. DeAngelo's decision to move the victim away from the driveway, down the side yard, and ultimately into the house was more than merely incidental, as it substantially increased the risk of harm to her above and beyond the crime of robbery itself. This movement fundamentally changed her environment and greatly minimized the chances of someone seeing the crime or hearing the victim's cries. It increased the possibility of further crimes being committed against her. Once inside the house, DeAngelo held a knife to her throat and placed his penis in her hands, which were still bound behind her back, and forced her to masturbate him. The victim said his penis felt greasy, like he had rubbed lotion on it. DeAngelo then raped and sodomized the victim as she screamed in pain. After forcing the victim to orally copulate him at knife point, DeAngelo continued to sexually assault her multiple times before tying her legs to an electrical piano. While sexually assaulting the victim, he taunted and threatened her by repeatedly saying things like, "You better do it right or I'll kill you. Have you ever done this before? Do you like to quote unquote fuck? With who?" After the sexual assaults, the defendant ransacked the house and drank beer from the refrigerator. DeAngelo drove away from the scene in the victim's car and stole her purse.
And that's who we're dealing with. Terry, he took this deal to take the death penalty off the table. I always wonder if that wasn't the case, he went to trial, ultimately was convicted, would a jury, despite how awful these crimes are, would they have had difficulty saying yes to the death penalty?
Absolutely not. They would have no difficulty saying yes to the death penalty. I mean, we're in California and there's a stay on the death penalty right now, but I do think a jury would come back and say that these crimes were so heinous. The crime that you just heard, she actually got away and, survived, not physically got away, but my point is she was spared her life. And I think that in all of the other cases where he murdered so many people, I think a jury is going to say, look, we need to at least give you the death penalty. And I think he got away with a good deal. Let me just say one more thing about the impact statements. Hopefully some of them will make him think about what his life might be like in jail. The fact that he might be subject to abuse. Not that I'm saying that should occur, but the point is it oftentimes does. And he should be thinking about what could happen. Yes, his life was spared, but he could have a horrible life in jail.
Yeah, what life that'll be for him. I want to turn to Joyce Dudley, who's the Santa Barbara prosecutor, another one of the prosecutors in this case. Again, just giving some further details for everybody to know about.
In the early morning hours of December 30th, 1979, the defendant, Joseph DeAngelo, climbed a fence and entered the back patio area of Robert's condominium. The defendant peered into a bedroom where he could easily see down the hallway and into the master bedroom where Robert and Deborah lie asleep. The defendant then pried open the rear sliding glass door that led into the living room. When the defendant entered the locked Offerman home, he did so with the intent to rape and murder Deborah Manning, to murder Robert Offerman, and to take items from the home. The defendant found Robert and Deborah asleep in bed. He tied both their wrists with white nylon cord. He inserted his penis into Deborah's vagina without her consent and raped her. After raping her, the defendant fired his handgun into the back of Deborah's head. The bullet entered the back of her head and lodged in her brain. The defendant left Deborah lying face down on the bed with her arms behind her back and her wrists bound with the white nylon cord. When the defendant fired this fatal shot, he did so unlawfully and with malice aforethought. The defendant's decision to kill Deborah Manning was willful, deliberate, and premeditated, as evidenced by him firing his handgun at a vital part of Deborah's body as she lay with her hands bound.
Kelly, when I listen to this, I always wonder, could this happen again? This is a situation where this guy ran rampant from the 70s to 80s. He wasn't caught until 2018 because of a new technology that came about, genetic genealogy, that ultimately helped track him. I wonder, could someone today in 2020 have commit this level of offenses, 161 uncharged crimes, multiple murders, and not be caught?
I hope not. For all our safety and our well-being, especially now with DNA and how things work. So I'm hopeful that because of that and forensic and all that information that we have now, that we won't have to deal with something like this ever again. I mean, this is horrific what these people went through in their family. No one should have to go through this ever again. And hopefully they'll have some peace when they give their witness statements, and the family will have peace as well on this.
Yeah, we've covered the Jerry Burns case on Law and Crime, and this is kind of the same, although he did go to trial. But the idea of genetic genealogy being used to not only target these suspects, lead to their apprehension, lead to the filing of charges, but either a guilty conviction in the Jerry Burns case, or here you have the Golden State Killer pleading guilty to all of these crimes. It just shows the power of technology that we're living in and how much more difficult it would be to commit these crimes and ultimately not be apprehended. I mean, people look at this and say, how was he able to go free for so long? That's what makes the sentencing hearing truly remarkable. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
Regarding count 8, the charge of murder of Charlene Smith, that count currently charges an open-ended murder through the allegation that you acted willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation when you unlawfully and with malice aforethought murdered Charlene Smith, which occurred on or about March 13th, 1980 through March 16th, 1980 in the county of Ventura, a violation of Penal Code Section 187 Pren A, murder in the first degree. How do you plead?
Guilty.
And that's what we're talking about right now. The Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, the Visalia Ransacker, whoever you want to call him, Joseph James DeAngelo, who will be sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. It is a major development here, and we're talking about what this sentencing could be like. Now, Terry, I want to turn to you because there was a development here where the judge in this case refused the state's motion to actually get in to evidence during this sentencing hearing these videos of DeAngelo in his jail cell, because they have always been adamant that this condition you see him in, this kind of frail, feeble condition, is an act, and that he's just putting this on. And they want to show video of him actually looking pretty okay in jail. In fact, they even said that they had a video of him performing a sex act while watching someone outside of his cell. Let's just sit on that for a second. Now, the judge said, I'm not going to allow this in. It's not really relevant. The defendant never put his health into issue to try to get a more lenient sentence or anything like that. What do you make of that?
You know, I think the judge probably made the right decision there. It's not really relevant. I mean, is he faking it? Yes. Do most defendants fake it? Yes. Are they going to behave differently when they're in prison? Yes, no doubt about it. I think people know he's faking it the way he sits there and he says, guilty. You know, I definitely think the judge probably made the right call there, because how he acted in prison when it's really not an issue here what his health is. Look, he took a plea. He's going to get 11 consecutive, life sentences. His health really isn't at issue here. So it would just be, I think the prosecution wanted to show what a bad guy this was.
How evil he is. They just want to show how evil he is, how everything he can't be, how bad of a person he is. I got to tell you, little side note, watching him with the face mask on, I think it makes him look even more creepier and scarier. That's just a side note, personal opinion. We're probably going to see more of that during the sentencing hearing, but just give you more of a sense of who we're talking about. Here's Venus Johnson, the Contra Costa County prosecutor, another prosecutor in this multi-jurisdictional prosecution, talking about the crimes of DeAngelo.
The following is a factual basis for count 72. On June 25th of 1979, in the city of Walnut Creek in the county of Contra Costa, the victim was home with her sister and father, Jane Doe, number 49. She and her sister went to bed at around 9:30 or 10 o'clock p.m., and her father had gone to bed a little later, around 11, all in their own respective bedrooms. It was customary for everyone to sleep with their bedroom doors closed. The victim indicated that she did sleep with her window open that evening. She wore a full-length nightgown to bed and cotton underwear. At some point in the middle of the night, a man jumped on her back. She was asleep in her bed. He put his hand over her mouth and said, quote, "Don't say a word. I'm not going to kill you. All I'm looking for is money. All I want is money." She could feel the sharp point of the knife being put to the side of her neck. He pulled her comforter back and told her to place her hands behind her back. She complied. She could feel her hands being tied tightly with some type of twine or rope. He then got off of her bed and covered her entire body, including her head, with the comforter. At some point during the sequence of events, her feet were tied together as well. At this point, she turned to see the male, Joseph DeAngelo, the defendant, in her bedroom. She observed his clothing and could see that he had a light-colored mask over his head. At that point, she was left alone for a few minutes as he rummaged through her bedroom. She was threatened again not to say a word. He then returned to her bed after about 5 minutes with a piece of cloth material and forced it into her mouth, and then tied a bra around her head and also obtained a pair of underwear from her underwear drawer and tied those behind her head. She was not blindfolded at this point. The defendant commanded her to keep her head down and not to look at him. He continued to say that he was looking for money, and at this point, she saw what she believed to be a flashlight after seeing momentary flashes of light in her room. He then found a table lamp in the room and turned it on and continued to rummage around her room and said, calling her out by name, "Just do what I want and I won't hurt you." She then heard what sounded like someone applying baby lotion or hand lotion either to their hands or some portion of their body. Defendant returned to her bed, straddled her body, and placed his penis in her hands, which were still tied behind her back, and told her, quote, "You rub my cock and you better make it good or I'll kill you." She did as she was told. He then directed her to turn over on her back and she complied. He removed the ties from her feet and reached under her nightgown, pulling her underwear down, and asked her something to the effect of, in a direct quote, had she fucked or done this before? At this point, her face was covered by a shirt that the defendant had put over her face and gave her the following command: "I want you to spread your legs apart." She complied. He got on his knees and maneuvered her legs on each side of his body and then penetrated her vagina without her consent.
Kelly, when you think about the pain and trauma that DeAngelo has inflicted upon multiple people, and we know that the victims and the victims' family members will provide statements to the court during the sentencing hearing, I wonder, what do you think visually it's going to look like? I can't help but imagine back to when we covered, the Larry Nassar sentencing, and some of these victims would speak directly to him, others could not. From a perception point of view, what can we expect? Because this could be one of the most difficult moments in their lives.
No, absolutely. And everyone handles it differently. Some of them will have their notes and will look down the whole time. Some will look directly at him. But I think it's really important that they're able to do this so they can get some type of peace and tell their side of the story. I mean, there was never a trial in the case. They never really got to say what they're feeling. And then knowing after all these years that the person that's harmed them so badly in their life is going to be put to justice. And so I think that's really important for them, knowing that. And everyone's going to, tell their story a little bit differently. But I'm glad that the family and the victims will have the opportunity to tell their story. Unfortunately, some, that are not alive won't have the opportunity to do that.
Right.
But, some that still are will have their opportunity to have their day in court.
And the family members of the victims who are no longer with us, those wounds are still fresh. Those wounds never go away. And this is their opportunity to speak to the man who inflicted that pain upon their families. Terry, something that Kelly just said and kind of hit me here is you also have to imagine this plea deal. We talked about it being beneficial to DeAngelo because death penalty was taken off the table, but it's also beneficial to the victims and the victims' family members because they don't have to testify. They didn't have to subject themselves to cross-examination by DeAngelo's lawyers.
That's right. And that did save them embarrassment. That saved them difficulty in testifying. God bless you. That saved them actually, the pain and suffering that they would have to go through for a blown out trial. And there's no guarantee what could happen with a trial. So I think in taking a plea deal, it's better for everyone all around. I think it really ties up all of the loose ends. We know for a fact that when he actually pled guilty to some uncharged crimes. And I think it's good for the authorities to close those cases as well. So it is a good situation for everyone. Obviously, he is not going to get the death penalty, so there is that. But at least it does put some closure, and it avoids the victims' families from having to testify.
Closure is the word. Closure is the word for a lot of these cases, a lot of these questions that people had over the years. But Kelly, back to you. We talk about the victims. We talk about DeAngelo, the judge. Judge Michael Bowman here. We have about 20 seconds. What do you expect from him during the sentencing? Because I know it's pretty much set and done, the life sentences, but I'm sure he's going to be listening to these words that are said.
No, absolutely. I think the judge is going to listen and give everyone, the victims and their family, an opportunity to speak because this is their day in court. And some people need that to have some kind of peace.
This is their day in court that many have been waiting for since the 70s. Terry, Kelly, thank you so much. Everyone out there, stay safe. We'll see you next time.